I have such strong conviction when I'm building. I very feel like that's very analogous to like your first startup versus your second startup. First startup, you get dropped in, you don't even know what the rules of the game are. All my startups have been like, oh, I experienced this problem. Okay, here's the solution I want. And now I'm going to go get feedback to figure out how many other people have this problem. Like Fathom, where we're like recording your meetings. Reliability is super important, right? Like it's a real-time system. I'd rather have a great product that only worked on the happy path than a good product that worked on all the different edge cases. I was very fortunate to fall into this group that was really excited about startups. And that's how I ended up like working in this company in the first batch of Y Combinator. But we think AI is going to get good in the next couple of years. We don't think people want transcripts, but we think you'll need a transcript to do all the fun stuff with AI.
First question off the bat, only because it was so interesting and I'm totally the opposite way. I can't sit for a long time with video games, but what's your go-to video game today? And what's one that you never mind kind of playing again, taking off the shelf?
Gosh, I'm embarrassed to say what my video today. My girlfriend and I actually play Fortnite quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, we play Zero Build Fortnite quite a bit. Though recently I also got into the Hogwarts game, which basically is Harry Potter meets Skyrim sort of thing.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like a Harry Potter RPG. It's pretty good.
And what platforms like your preferred go-to? PC?
I intentionally only keep a Switch around because I find PC gaming can be too addictive. I actually I still kind of watch a lot of boss fights on like YouTube just to inoculate myself and feel like I need to play that game. Okay, I saw the end. If I had one game ever to pull off the shelf, it has to be Zelda, right? Like,
Really?
not the original one. No, the Switch one, just like discovering, just like climb around that world is just like so intoxicating. It's just like such a cool little alternate like reality. I love it.
Yeah. In a previous interview, I heard you describe that building companies is a lot like playing a video game, and describe that to our audience so that they can hear kind of your philosophy behind, the different phases of building and how returning to the game, it always has a different but unique experience. Describe that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and again, I realize it's like a very privileged way to look at it, right? But I think it's an important perspective of like, I think at least for the startups I've been starting, I'm fortunate enough that like the game doesn't go well, you can always go get another job type of thing, right? Tech, which is nice. I always like to kind of draw analogies back to Minecraft. If you ever played Minecraft, it's just like this open world game. There's no instructions. There's no way to win technically. You just kind of get dropped in and stuff starts happening. And the first time you get dropped into Minecraft, you have no idea. It's, oh, this is cool. You kind of wander around. You don't know what you're doing. I think it took an hour to figure out you had to punch a tree to get some wood, which then you can make a torch. But once you play it or you watch people play it on YouTube, you start figuring it out, right? Next time you play it, or if you get a little experience, like experienced players within 10 minutes, they built a castle and it's got a moat and a drawbridge and all sorts of crazy stuff, right? And I very feel like that's very analogous to like your first startup versus your second startup. First startup, you get dropped in, it's just this open world. Like you don't even know what the levers are. You don't even know what the game, like what the rules of the game are. Like marketing channels. I don't know what marketing channels I need. I don't even know what marketing channels there are, right? And the second time you do a startup, you start realizing that all these things that seemed like open-ended questions were actually multiple choice questions. Oh, marketing channel to use? Okay, there's only 7 really, like 4 of these don't make sense. And so it just kind of feels like that game where all of a sudden, oh, I know how to play this game and I know how to like, take things that were kind of open-ended essay questions before and now turn them into multiple choice questions that I can just make rapid decisions about.
Yeah. It's fascinating thinking about your journey in particular. And for those who don't know, this is not your first startup that you built. It's similar in the essence of its core philosophy behind feedback. And I hear founders always trying to get more feedback and customer user feedback and really trying to identify the direction they should go. When you learn that first process of gathering feedback, why was it so valuable to be such a core philosophy for now? And I'm assuming if Fathom goes well, you'll take that on to the next company. What kind of is behind the feedback that you should be looking for as a founder, not just asking questions like, hey, do you like this? Or does this look cool? Because those don't really get you anywhere.
Yeah. I think there's this interesting kind of like tension between like conviction and getting feedback, right? I think you need to have enough conviction in the core of what you're building. And then you want feedback to help you like iterate the last mile and figure out the finer points of it, the rough edges and things like that. There's the whole lean startup methodology where you use feedback just to try to figure out what the heck you're building in the first place. But that's not my strategy. I've tend to be fortunate where I've built things that solved a problem I've had. All my startups have been like, oh, I experienced this problem. Okay, here's the solution I want. And now I'm going to go get feedback to figure out how many other people have this problem and do their needs dramatically differ from mine and stuff like that. I think where I see people go wrong is I see like people don't have any conviction. They're just, I'm going to twist in the wind based on the last thing I heard right? And that becomes really problematic if you don't have kind of this core vision or conviction. Or the reverse, where it's like, I have such strong conviction when I'm building. When I hear feedback that's like counter to that, I just like, they're wrong, right? And you
Yeah.
kind of throw it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
It's actually, I don't think we talk about this stuff. It's really hard to be open to feedback because you almost never, best case scenario of feedback is you get someone saying, yep, you're right, keep going, right? This is great. But a lot of times you get, that's not quite great, right? And that takes a lot of like emotional fortitude to put up with
Yeah.
someone telling you your baby is ugly.
Yeah.
And I think as founders, I still think it's really hard to, I think a lot of companies have good products and they delude themselves and think they have great products. And I think that's the hardest thing as a founder is to look at your baby and be like, that is kind of ugly. Let's make it better. Right.
Yeah.
So
What's the
I think it's super
what's the
important.
separation between good to great?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I'm going to use this analogy I've used before. To me, I think Android is good. iPhone is great. That analogy maybe doesn't hold as much water in 2024 as it did maybe 10 years ago. I haven't used an Android in a while, but I often think that was interesting. I mean, they do the same thing, right? That mean features and functionality are there. So what's the difference? I think it's the last mile, right? And so I
Mhm.
think that's true in a lot of products where a lot of people get hung up on my product can do this thing. Therefore, like, why wouldn't you use it? Right?
Right.
Functional, right? Like it can do the thing. But there's like a big difference between it can do the thing, which is, yeah, it can receive a phone call
Yeah.
and it can do that really elegantly and better than anyone else. And that's great. Right.
Yeah.
And I think in 2024, most of what I feel like most stuff is now gravitating back towards like word of mouth as the primary channel for marketing. Again, it's paid ads are a mess, content SEO is a mess. All these kind of like Northwest passages to like a bunch of cheap users have all dried up. And now we're back in this
Mhm.
like really competitive market space where you have to have a great product to get word of mouth. People don't they don't tell their friends about some like good enough it functioned, right, kind of
Yeah.
product, right? And so I think for a lot of founders, their bar isn't high enough in terms of what their product needs to be. We know what great is. You've used it. You've used iPhones and you've used other apps that are fantastic.
Yeah.
But somehow when it's ours, we don't hold it to the same quality standard.
What do you think that is? Is it like an ego thing? Do you see it as a perspective or a vantage point? Maybe they can't really see the angle that others are seeing. What would you call out that is common for a founder that you say, oh, that's a really good product, but they're not delivering on this particular thing that could make them great, whether it's visually, user experience, or business model?
Yeah. I mean, I think my background is engineering and product design. And I actually think where a lot of these things fall down are in one of those two disciplines. And I think it's actually really challenging sometimes if you don't have a background in those disciplines to recognize the difference between good and
Mm.
great. If you don't have an engineering background, how can you really tell that your platform isn't that, oh yeah, I guess all things are kind of buggy, right? How can you tell when your engineers tell you, oh, this is good, this is good enough, right? The honest answer is
Right.
like, oh, if you don't have a technical background, if you don't have a very strong technical team, it's really hard to get to great, right? I think the
Right.
biggest blocker I've seen for most startup founders is like, if I don't have the skills myself, if I don't have top 10% engineering skills and design skills, going on sourcing, that's really hard. And so I
Yeah.
think you end up in this place where this is the best I could build with the tools I had at my disposal sort of thing.
Mhm.
Now, to be clear, there are markets where good is fine. You can go find some niche where just the fact you're serving that niche doesn't have to be Apple level of product polish for you to win. I'm thinking about specifically the things I've gone after, like tend to have, they're not
Yeah.
consumer, but they're like consumer-ish B2B kind of plays where product design and stuff like that's really important. But yeah, I think it's hard to build products. It's even harder to build teams to build products, right? And so
Yeah.
if you don't have that eye for it yourself, it's really hard to hire for it. And if you don't have that team, then I can't make this thing any better. So I'm kind of just going to go to war with the army that I have sort of thing. Right. And I'm going to delude
Yeah.
myself into thinking it's good enough.
Yeah. I feel like that typically works when founders have a perspective of this is like my beta or my alpha and then my MVP. And they kind of build and use this word tranches. Not necessarily it captivates what we're talking about now, but in step-by-step motion, they kind of know where they want it to go, but kind of build the most necessary features to get users on and to go up to that point. I'm curious because coming from an engineering and product background, I had another conversation with the founder, similar background, and I'm curious if this affects you as well, changing kind of your mindset that if there's a bug, stop everything, I got to fix that one thing, nothing else works, and complete it. But as a founder, some things kind of can be haphazardly put together and you can do some manual effort to get across the line for a customer. do you still have to go through that code switching, or when in your founder experience did you kind of make that relationship change?
Yeah, there's what we call in engineering, like the happy path, where it's the happy path is like most average use case, average user, right? Like they do everything right. They don't have any weird kind of setup things, right? Like, does it work in the happy path? And I do think in the beginning, depending on what your product is, right? Obviously, for something like Fathom, where we're like recording your meetings, we kind of reliability is super important, right? Like it's kind of a real time system. But for a lot of products, that's not true, right? And so you can kind of suffer through in the early days. I'd rather we'll put it this way. I'd rather have a great product that only worked on the happy path than a good product that worked on all the different edge cases, right?
Right.
I think you want to first prove that like I can build one great experience and then I can fan out from there and make it work for more scenarios, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Did you always think you were going to be a founder, an entrepreneur? Was that something that was always in the cards?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I was reflecting on this recently. I think in like first grade, I was like selling pictures to other kids. Like I drew mazes and sold them to other kids. And like high school, I sold like fake Oakleys to other kids and stuff like this. But I grew up in North Carolina where it wasn't really like a strong entrepreneurial, always tech entrepreneurial scene back in the day, probably a better one now. And I actually struggled to find other people to do startups with. And I think right after college, I did like a startup in college. And right after college, I kind of honestly was kind of demoralized and got a normal, like 9 to 5 job. So I was like, this thing doesn't seem like can't find
Yeah.
anyone to do this with. And these things don't seem to be working. Maybe I should just do what everyone else around me is doing and just get a job at IBM or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate to kind of fall into this group that was really excited about startups. And that's how I ended up like working in this company in the first batch of Y Combinator. I didn't know what Y Combinator was at that point, but I just knew I found this like cabal of folks that thought like default assumption is like, I want to build something new. And so that was like that was like a sliding doors moment for me. I very easily could have just
Yeah.
been a band-aid engineer at IBM at this point
Right.
in North Carolina, and said I'm a multi-time like founder here in San Francisco. So I do think, yeah, I always kind of wanted to do startup stuff, but it's hard to do alone. Like you really need to find the tribe of other founders. And I think that's the other challenge of the founders. Like everyone tends to fall in love with their idea, and it's really hard to
Mm.
get people to like, if you bake that thing too much, it's really hard to get other people excited about your idea, right? That's
Yeah.
almost like the first like point of feedback you need. And if you look at things like Y Combinator, they tend to prefer multi-founder companies, right? Not solo founders.
Right.
And I think because it's just like almost like a signal, right? It's in the same way that like all the best salespeople go work at the companies where the product is easy to sell, which is VCs use that as, oh, all these good salespeople went to work here. That clearly means it's an easy product to sell. If you can't, the early stage investor heuristic is, if you couldn't convince anyone else to work on this with you, that's one sign that maybe this idea isn't as good as you think it is, sort of thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. It was an interesting thinking about User Voice, which was the first startup you grew. And I have such a fascination with products that are seemingly unnoticeable, but are everywhere. And the fact that you can get them there is something I obsess about. And User Voice, for those who don't know, which I didn't know until I read your background, is the reason why you see that feedback tab on almost every website that you go and visit. I don't know if it's still true nowadays, but I feel like I still see it all the time. But how did you first initiate that strategy of, okay, we're going to lay on, what was it, trying to lay on every website and just figuring out how to then sell back to whoever owned that domain or whatever company? How did you first get into being on, say, a website and platform and then grow that and then now be completely kind of almost like a standard for a lot of companies trying to get feedback?
yeah, I think my buddy Justin has this great tweet. It's first time founders think about product, second time founders think about distribution. And I've been fortunate for both the businesses, User Voice and Fathom. User Voice, we kind of looked in distribution strategy. Fathom, we were kind of intentional about it from the get-go. But in both cases, we had this kind of more like viral bottoms up type motion where it's for Fathom, it's like Fathom bot joins your meeting. It's recording summaries. You can send them out to attendees. There's kind of a natural, other people kind of interact with it. User Voice had the same thing where we set up these sites. User Voice, you could think of as like for product feedback, right? And if you were kind of a tech company and you were getting a lot of feedback, you don't have time to comb through individual ones and read everything. Great. Let the community submit ideas and vote up each other's ideas, right? And it was pretty successful when we were able to get people to those sites, like to that company's Reddit, if you will, right? Like their User Voice site. The problem was most companies just would put a link in the footer of their page being like feedback, right? It's right next to support and like FAQs and about us, right? Like in the footer. And we kind of felt, and most users aren't seeking that out. right? Most
Mhm.
users were just like, most companies don't want feedback. Most companies like put that down there as like because we got to have something for someone to go yell into the void. Let's put it in the footer, right? And so early on in that company, we kind of realized like, we need to somehow communicate to the users of this product, right? That like this company has set up the site. They actually really do want your feedback. And we need to
Yeah.
make it like really stupid simple for the companies to be able to promote this. And so we said we could put banners at the top of the page. It's a little too invasive. Let's just put this little button on the side of the page that says feedback. And originally it was like red with like white text. It was like a really high visibility. And it worked because then the companies, people go to the sites and be like, oh, wow, there's a big button that says feedback. Clearly this company really, oh, wow, okay, I guess they do want my feedback, right? And click in and see what that
Right.
is. And then that paradigm got copied and emulated by
Yeah.
everyone. And now became a very standard thing if we want feedback. And now it's kind of back to where it started, where it's now you see them so much everywhere that it doesn't actually tell you this company cares that much about feedback. It's kind of now the new standard version of putting it in the footer.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting journey of how quickly like a concept can just be replicated throughout the internet very quickly.
Yeah. You mentioned virality. And of course, I think founders are always trying to hit virality, but I don't know if a lot of them know what goes into actually getting to that point where you can reach a mass amount of users in a short amount of time. A lot of them think it's, oh, a social post or
Yeah.
something that's hopping on a trend. What actually leads into creating virality for a company in your book?
It's interesting because the original, like, if we go back 10 years to like the early Facebook apps and all this stuff, when people talk about virality, typically they're always talking about this like spam your contact list type mechanic, right? Where it's like, you sign up for this app, sign up for Farmville, 1 out of 10 people will allow Farmville to spam everyone on their list. That hits 100 people, of which, and therefore, for every 10 signups, you got 11 new ones, right? And the curves there tend to look very front loaded. Like I knew some friends that were doing these startups and they would like amazing growth. Like they'd have millions of users within a month or two. And then it was just absolutely crater because they hit the ceiling of they basically would have crawled the entire Facebook graph, right? Within 2 months and hit it. Right. And see, so historically virality was like this like firecracker, like boom, explosion. But I actually think the virality that we're going for that I think is more just like, really, it's word of mouth marketing at internet scale, right? Word of
Yeah.
mouth marketing used to be blocked by it's word of mouth, like literally someone talking in the grocery store, and how many people this is kind of limited by how much interaction there is in the general populace. But now social media, like word of mouth, is like actually weaponized, and like now it
Yeah.
can spread really far and wide. The challenge with virality is actually doesn't. It's not it has a cold start problem, right? Like
Mhm.
for it to work in this new message model, it's not going to, we're not spamming people's inboxes. What we're doing is every time someone meets with someone, that person they're meeting with is somewhat likely to sign up for Fathom, but it's a very long, slow burn. And the hard part is how do you get the first 10,000, 100,000 users to then kick up, to make that flywheel start working effectively.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
if you want to make something word of mouth, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's one, it has to be something that's visible. If you've got some back office B2B product, it's going to be tough, right? Like
Yeah.
you certainly get some, but it's going to be hard. You're going to have to manufacture people posting reviews or building some sort of thing. So obviously it helps if you're like us and you build something that's like kind of like public facing, if you will, in a way, right? At least your user's usage is clear to other people, right? And then, honestly, you also need something that's like not vertical specific. It's hard to get virality with vertical specific because if we were just selling to salespeople, how often do salespeople talk to other salespeople? Maybe 1 out of 10 times. And then you have to make something that's like really good. And for us, it was like building something where my background's product design. So we spent a lot of effort making the user experience really good, but we also were the first people to give away this kind of product for free, a free kind of AI note taker. And that was not just free because everyone has a free plan, but like unlimited use for free, like a really good free version. You can actually use this free version
Yeah.
forever. Right. And so I think those three things are really important for us, right? It's okay. People can see it being used. People love it because it's free and it does something for them. And the other nice thing about free is people feel like they have good like brand vibes with companies that give them something for free, right? There's
Yeah.
almost this like social indebtedness where it's like, oh, you gave me this thing for free. I feel like I owe it to you to tell my friends about it, or I want to share this
Yeah.
in a way that doesn't work for paid products, right? If I'm paying you $20 for your product, I feel like there's a transaction there, right? I don't owe you anything. In fact, you probably owe me. I gave you $20, right? You owe me really good support. And so this is why I think giving away a product for free is really powerful for word of mouth marketing. Because it just creates this like gratitude amongst your users. And also you get a lot of affordance, right? Oh, there's a bug with it. It's free. I guess I can't really complain. I only think about the upside, right? I think
What
there's a
made
very
you
specific cocktail that makes it work.
Yeah, and what made you the way you charge, and correct me if I'm wrong here, of course, the way you charge is you have a freemium product or a free product, and for those who have teams of people and want insight, they have team managers, you sell to those organizations so they can have more intelligence for their teams and things like that. How did you come upon that? Was it just the fact that it's low barrier to entry, kind of a Trojan horse approach, and not do, say, tiers of offerings or maybe just a complete paywall in general, like a lot of companies do? What made you go the route you did?
Yeah, going back to what I was saying, I think having a completely free product, I think consumers are pretty savvy this day
Mhm.
and age about you show them 3 plans and one of them's free. They're going to know that you're probably smart enough there's no way I could possibly use that thing for free,
Yeah,
right? There's going to be some gotcha in there sort of thing, right? So I also just think that for B2B products like ours, right, you can make a lot more money by selling to a manager than selling to an IC, which is why most of the existing products have been built for and sold to ICs. Like our top competitor is a company called Gong, is for sales only and really targeted the sales manager. The ICs don't use it as much. It's what I learned in my early research. And I was like, oh, I think there's an opportunity here where we can give away our product for free to the ICs, develop a lot of goodwill that allows us to get in a company and have a warm conversation with that manager, right? It's tough to
yeah,
come in cold. It's tough to get leads. Everyone's inbox is full. It's just hard to break into talking to managers unless the managers, my team's using this product. They seem to love it and they reach out or it just really pre-warms that conversation. And so that was always our thinking. We'd much rather use the ICs, the individual contributors, the folks on the front lines to use the product, get excited about it, become champions. And then we get the manager and say, hey, we have a slightly different product for you that builds on top of this, right? And
yeah,
if you can charge, it's tough to charge individuals more than $15, $20 for something, but you can charge managers 2, 3x of that pretty handily, right? If you can build a
right.
product that also maps to them. So that was a very intentional strategy. I think there's a few companies that have done that. I tend to think, you also see this a lot in like open source products as well, where they give away the core product to then sell to an executive audit something different, right? Like a managed
Yeah,
package, something like that. I think it's when these models, like this kind of free, I hate to call it freemium, but like this kind of free plus premium upsell model, when it comes in contact with someone that's a traditional top-down sale, take a demo, talk to my sales team, the free model crushes it every time. Because what would you rather have? Would you rather have something you can just start trying and using, or would you rather have something you got to talk to a sales team and pay
do all
five
that.
figures for? No one wants to do that
Right.
anymore, right? And everyone has enough software. Everyone's had enough experiences where they bought some software and it didn't work. So no one really wants to take the risk anymore. Everyone wants like something they can validate first and then pay for maybe later.
Yeah. How do you go through as a founder to accept that fact? Because there's so many founders out there and who are like, my company's got to make money. And so we have to figure out monetization fairly quickly, even with a rudimentary product. How do you accept the fact that, okay, for the first, I don't know how many users until we have some kind of critical mass, we're not going to really think about monetizing as much in terms of our roadmap until we get to the next thing, which is keeping those users. And then we start to distribute and things like that. How do you go through and accept the fact and kind of prepare your team around how the strategy is going to lead to long-term success? Because you're hiring people and you bring them on, they're like, we have a free product. What's the strategy here? What's the long-term play? Go through that kind of decision-making thought process and then communicating that to your team and everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like to attack the core metrics of the business in serial, right? If you think about the core metrics of the business, like how do we get new users? How good are we at kind of onboarding them into the product, making them successful? How good are we retaining them? How good are we getting them to refer other users? And the last one, how good are we getting them to pay us money for it? Those are all really hard things to get right. And it's really hard to do them all at once, which I think is like what a lot of folks try to do. They try to do, I'm going to put, if I go back to some video game analogies, let's imagine these all like different talent trees. I'm going to try to put a few points in each one of these. We're going to have okay customer acquisition, okay onboarding,
Mm,
okay across the board, right? And I tend to think that strategy doesn't work. Now, what's challenging is if you're trying to raise money and you're first time founder, everyone wants you to show revenue. No one else believes you until it's kind of the
yeah,
tough reality, right? And so you get all these folks that are like, how do I get someone paying me for vaporware in 6 weeks? I don't know how you solve that problem. That problem's hard. But what I do think is a more sustainable way to build a business is at least ones like ours, where we have a plan for, we know how to monetize. I think it was never, the monetization part wasn't risky for me. The risky part of Fathom was like, can we actually build this free product? Will people actually stick with it? And will they recommend it to others? That to me was the hardest part. And I was pretty confident if we get people using this thing day in, day out, we'll find a way to monetize it. We have some ideas, but like
Yeah.
Very few products, there are very few products out there that get high usage and have poor revenue. This was the knock
Yeah.
on Facebook 15 years ago. Oh, people use Facebook. How's it going to make any money? No one's asking that question today,
Right.
right? It's well validated that you get millions of users, hundreds of thousands of users, whatever. For the most part, you can always make some money on it. Now, can you make $1 billion? Can you make meta level money? Maybe not. But so
Right.
I always think we've got to validate this by getting someone to pay us for it immediately. I don't love that strategy. And I think that's my contrarian take of this podcast.
Yeah.
I think just getting someone to use something day in, day out is a signal in and of itself. Right. And we were very intentional with Fathom where we're like, cool, we're going to build the happy path version of the product. We're going to have ongoing cohorts of beta users, and we're not going to stop until we get to one cohort where it's kind of sticky. We're like,
Yeah.
they stick with it. And I think it took us like 800 people in my network that I got to try to install Fathom till we got to 50 people that on a recurring basis kept using it.
Yeah.
And once we had that, I was like, okay, great, we've got something. And then we launched on this app marketplace, the Zoom app marketplace. And so we're pretty fortunate that got us a bunch of users. And then we focused only on onboarding. Great. We're very confident this thing is sticky once you start using it. Great. Now we're going to focus on making sure the onboarding is really good and like really buttery smooth, really simple. We remove all the things we defer. We don't have to have it in the setup process. We defer it to later and breadcrumb it out like a video game would in a tutorial, right? And then we started thinking, okay, great. Now onboarding, we 3x our onboarding rate from like 30% to like 80%, right? Great. Onboarding's good. Now we're going to tweak the things that allow users to refer it to other folks.
Yeah.
Great. Now, once we did all this, we're going to start charging for it. And honestly, it was 2 years after we started the company and a year after we launched before we charged the first person. And very candidly, I would have pushed that out even further if the market hadn't shifted in 2022 and it kind of now you had to start proving monetization. Everyone wanted to see it. And that's kind of the environment we live in now. But if you can find a way like, hey, we don't need much to live. We can just focus on building a product, give it away for free, getting a bunch of users. Again, have a theory for how you're going to charge them at some point, because it is hard to convert those free users into, once someone gets used to free, they're not going to want to pay for something. But in our case, the free user was never the target buyer. It was always going to be their manager. So it was fine.
Yeah. Super smart approach. I love it. And you also talk about something, and I'm curious because you mentioned something before the show and something about customer support and how much your team focuses on having excellent customer support. But my question, and I'm sure a lot of founders have, is like, what's the cost to that? Those are, if it's people, what's the cost to your company? If it's a certain type of technology or feature you built in, what's the cost nowadays to having high quality customer support when everyone's trying to just have offload support to something else?
I always think when everyone's doing it one way, you should always consider, should you do it a different way? Because that's an opportunity to differentiate yourself, right? And if you go back to one of our original topics about feedback, support is feedback. Support is actually the most honest version of feedback you will get, which is actually the second part of feedback that's hard. It's hard to get honest feedback because you'll share your friends. Oh, what do you think of this? And they'll be like, oh, it's great, Tim. I love it. And they're grading you on a curve because they like you, right?
Yeah.
Support is not graded on a curve. These people are frustrated. And I think that's where you learn a lot about where the product is falling down. Once you get it can be a distraction in the beginning, right? If you're just trying to figure out can I build a happy path product that's really awesome? Then getting support inquiries about all the little ways it breaks for all these edge cases should be ignored. But maybe not ignored, but you just tell them, hey, like we're early. We don't know how to support that yet. Great feedback, come back to it. But I think that my big thing with support is like founders do support early on, right? And then almost always the first person they hire is a support person. Like, I want to not do this anymore. And it makes sense, right? And so but it's the first thing you want to outsource. And I don't think it's a bad idea to do that. But I think you should always stay engaged. You should make sure that person's really good. And you should always stay engaged yourself of making sure things get escalated to you. And honestly, it's never been easier. We built out a system a couple of weeks ago that uses an LLM and looks at every support ticket and just analyzes the sentiment for it. And if we think that user is really frustrated, it pops up in a Slack channel and I jump into that ticket, right?
Yeah.
So if you ever want to talk to me on support, just be really ragey in a support ticket to Fathom and it'll like immediately pop in my inbox. But I also feel like we're entering this era pretty soon where support should get really easy. A lot of these like LLMs for support are getting better. They've been hot garbage to date, but I think they're probably going to get good enough this year. But yeah, it's weird to me that companies always underinvest in this and just try to I think once they start scaling, they just want to, I get the same questions over. I want to create distance. I want to put all these hurdles between users and contacting me. And I'm always like, again, if you're a word of mouth product, not a good idea to ignore that. Like when people are really mad, that just means they care. I always told people at user voice, like What you should be worried about is indifference, not angry customers. Angry customers are people that really want your product to work. And if you could fix it for them, they're going to be really happy with you. And
Yeah.
so that's why I think invest in support, make the process good. Don't put I hate these companies where I get the chat bot and then I got to talk to the AI and I've got to like convince it that I've got a real unique problem that's not just in the
Yeah.
knowledge base. And yeah, I read those 3 articles you shared with me that had nothing to do with what my problem is. Da, da, da. Don't do that. That's so obnoxious. We all hate that experience, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I laugh really hard because that's just, I mean, I don't know how many products, whether it's government or commercial products, they all have that same experience.
we'll see.
But it is exciting to see where it's going with a lot of the AI chatbots and how much the standard is being increased, and the want for it to feel human is almost becoming mandatory for a lot of
Mhm.
customers because
Yeah,
of that experience.
yeah.
I guess, yeah, I get as a second time founder, I was looking reviewing your product as I do, and I mean you're doing all the right things, right? It's transparencies on your webpage. It all looks good. You tell us why you're not charging, what we're doing with our data, where AI comes into place. You're giving us transparent pricing. You're doing everything through word of mouth. You've got great social channels. Everything looks like a startup should nowadays. I guess for you as a second time founder, what's there to learn rather other than testing out this particular hypothesis?
I'd say there's 2 things. I mean, one is there's this whole community of video gamers called speedrunners where they just try to beat a video game as quickly as possible. And some insane stuff that these folks do. It's kind of cool. And I kind of feel like I'm speedrunning, right? It's like a runner who's just always trying to beat their PR, right? Where it's
Yeah.
okay, we kind of know the levers to pull. So again, I think speed of execution is everything. And so like, how do we just do this thing faster than last time? And so that's part of it. The other part though is like a lot of the tactics change, right? Like my last company started over 10 years ago. And so there's a lot of stuff that has shifted. And that's been the value of making sure you've got a good tribe of other startup people around you. I mentioned, I was an employee in the first batch of Y Combinator back in 2005, 2006. But we went through Y Combinator with Fathom and everyone's like, why did you do that? I was like, I knew most of the people that worked there. Why I did is because I wanted to get reconnected to this community of people that were all starting companies that were very candidly generally a lot younger than I was, sort of thing. Because by the time you read like a marketing book or by the time you read some blog post or some book about here's how to do a thing, I can almost tell you that's not how to do the thing anymore. That's how to do the thing 18 to 36 months ago. And you benefit a lot from having other folks that are in the arena that are trying things from first principles. Oh, we tried this on LinkedIn and this really works, right? And it's going to work for 2 months and the algorithm's going to change again. You got to adapt. It is kind of speed running an old video game, but it's not quite the same video game. Remember, it's actually slightly morphing like every time you look
Yeah.
back at it. And so it's kind of fun and kind of redeeming.
Yeah. But it's exciting too, because a lot of companies are building from their customer's point of view, thinking a
Mhm.
lot about the experience, thinking a lot about how they can have their customer do exactly what is happening with Fathom, is tell their friends about it. How much can you enable the customer to have a more intimate experience with your products?
Mhm.
Obviously, I think it works more in depth with others and less so with some, but that whole approach is going to lead, in my I guess, experience to more trust, faster adoption, and that just overall leads to better growth. And then you could test in different markets. When you think about fundraising, and I know you've gone through the process again, but you did something unique this time with Fathom, which is you crowdfunded. And I'm curious, was that just to get more people aligned to the mission and goal of what you were doing and kind of get more evangelists on board, or was that a different kind of strategy that you just wanted to test out? Why did you go the crowdfund route when I'm sure at this point you have a lot of contacts, you've got a big network, you know, that's not necessarily, you think of crowdfunding as more of a necessity rather than a choice.
Yeah, I think I certainly see that in a lot of the crowdfunding sites. It's been awesome for us. I mean, we had raised, I think about $5 or $6 million from traditional investors before that. Our fundraising strategy in general, it's a little atypical. Like most companies go and you kind of go find an institutional investor, a VC, or early stage fund, and you go find maybe 2 or 3 of these, sometimes just one, and you go raise $2 million. We actually kind of had almost like a crowdfunding strategy from the get-go where I think we got about 100 people on the cap table, right? We had 25K checks, 50K checks. And I was very intentional. I was like, I want to build this big coalition of people that have our back, but also have unique insights, right? That like CEOs of these types of companies and people with this kind of background. So when I send that investor update every month, right, and I make certain asks like, oh, I need to get connected to this company or this company, or you need to understand this. So we already had kind of this like strategy that was a little atypical of let's go get a bunch of checks and a bunch of investors. And some ways crowdfunding is the logical extension of that. But you're right. It was also really started off as a marketing campaign. I was like, I don't see why not to do this. I asked some of our existing investors about it, and they said it used to have a bit of a stigma around it with VCs that like only the worst companies were doing it. You were doing it because you needed to. It would like no one else would fund you, so you're going the crowdfunding route. But I think it's kind of changed a little bit more recently. And honestly, I think it's fantastic. I mean, we raised the kind of like the legal limit without some regulatory paperwork of like 1.3 million
Yeah.
from about 1,000 users. And the number of times I hear I was a user and I was an investor and my company bought your team edition. Again, for a word of mouth product, I think it's just, I love that alignment. We actually even early on gave equity to some users. This is an
Really?
idea that you see a lot in crypto. I don't have a lot of good things to say about crypto, but one of the things I would say is some of the crypto projects have this cool thing like called airdrops, where it's like early users, depending on how much you use that platform, get actually a stake in the token for that platform. And I thought that's a really interesting alignment, right? If you think
Right.
about how valuable the first couple hundred users are that are really engaged, give you great feedback, telling their friends, those people are super valuable. And yeah, why shouldn't they have a little skin in the game sort of thing? And so I think the crowdfunding thing is just a much more scalable way to kind of enable that, right? Like, cool, throw in $100, throw in $1,000. It's great.
Yeah.
I'd rather have 100,000 like $100 investors than a bunch of
Mhm.
100K investors, right? Like people's caring about something is binary, right? They're going to invest some money in you, and
Right.
they're now going to feel what they put. It's all relative to them. I got investors put $100 that probably care more than people that wrote me a 100K check, and it's super cool.
Yeah. When do you think was the, I guess, shift for, obviously, I think the younger generations nowadays seems like Gen Z is super tied to what companies are doing even outside of their products. So it's okay,
Mhm.
you have the user experience, but what are the other things? How's your leadership team acting? What's their pedigree? But now it seems like it's a global switch. Everyone wants to be a part of the products that they're using. And it's even that much more important. Like some restaurants I won't eat at because they have a different political point of view. And when do you think that shift, is there any moment in time where you really felt customers or this whole relationship between customers and companies changed from, okay, I'm going to try to get as much out of my users as possible, whereas now it's, I'm going to make my users' life so much better that they can't help but talk about how good we are. Where do you think
Yeah,
that
I
shift?
mean, I think, like I said, I think social media kind of weaponized word of mouth, both in the positive and negative directions, right? So it's individual users, especially if they have an audience, can have a lot of sway, right? And so
Yeah.
it's kind of leveled the playing field. Whereas before, back in the day, it was like users have no power, right? Like the customer doesn't have a lot of, vote with your wallet. Kind of not
Right.
easy to do, right? No, Nabisco doesn't care what you do with your wallet as an individual. Now, 100,000 individuals, it cares, right? Or one user with 100,000 individuals that pay a lot of attention when they say care. So I think social media has the power dynamic. It may have actually kind of swung it now to where I think in a lot of cases, sometimes the users have more power than some of the platforms themselves in certain niches, right? But that's, I think, so I don't think there was a moment, but that water's been steadily warming to a boil over the last 10 years, right? And now
Yeah.
it's definitely boiling. And again, another reason why we actually intentionally didn't do much on social. What we really have only done is just like all the effort I would have historically put into social, I've just put into like customer support. My argument
Right.
at usually was like, you don't end up with bad stuff on customers on social media if you do good customer support. If you don't do good customer support, there's really this like second, you can always escalate to social media, right? Like it's whether your company
Yeah.
has an escalation process or not, the world has one called Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Or LinkedIn. And so if you don't handle it well, it's getting escalated there and you're not going to like that. That's going to be a way more expensive ticket to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got some rapid fire questions for you, Richard. And
Okay.
so I'd love to hear your perspective. One of them, honestly, is what do you think the biggest risk is that your company faces today? What do you think about as a founder?
Right now I think about hiring, and this is a cliche answer, but I just think that we have a great small team. I think once companies start growing as quickly as we're growing, there's always this tendency to drop your quality standards and we just need help, right? Get
Yeah.
in sort of thing. I think a lot about that, right? Like it's tough. When we're sub 20 employees, it's somewhat very easy. It's not super easy, but to have a great culture where everyone knows each other and they get along well. But that's the thing that I think about a lot is just, it's tough to really get to know the measure of someone in 3 hours of interviews across 5 people. It's challenging.
Yeah. As a founder, if you're hiring, hearing that are you going local, hybrid, remote? What's kind of your philosophy behind team building now that everyone seems to have their own unique way of having people on board, whether it's for compliance reasons, for businesses that need that security or preference?
I vastly prefer remote. It's funny.
Yeah.
Usually started off fully remote 15 years ago before that was really a thing. And then we built an office, then we built another office. And I spent most of my life flying between these two offices. And then COVID hit. And they're like, why did I do that? So I love working from anywhere. And I think when it comes to this, like I'm pretty skeptical of hybrid. I think I don't think you can have some people in the office and people not. I think you just got to
Mm,
pick a lane. I think there's benefits to if I was, younger and I was building a smaller team and like a younger team, like having an office, and whatnot would be great, right? Most of our teams are a little
right.
more senior. They all have families. So like being remote is great. Like it allows them to have more time with their families, allows them to be anywhere in the country. We're fully remote, mostly US. So we have some of our team in the Philippines. We've got another person on our team in Australia, but I think there's going to be a lot of upheaval. I think if you're also fully remote, a lot of folks in the last 5 years got a taste of what that is, and they
Yeah.
really like it. Employees like it, and management hates it. And now you're
Right.
seeing
Yeah.
all these return to office things, which are kind of befuddling to me. I'm not sure why they're doing this return to office. I think because they just haven't figured out how to scale managing large groups of folks remotely. And so
Yeah.
now you've got all this great talent I don't want to move. Sometimes I have to move towns if they want to go back to an office. We had a couple ex-employees from my last company who were like, working at Amazon. Amazon, you have 2 months to move to one of these 3 places in the country and go to the office. I'm like, so I tend to
Yeah.
think if depending on the kind of talent you want to hire, going full remote and building that in your core DNA from the beginning, which is like super important. Like it's a different kind of business.
Yeah.
I think what happened during COVID is a lot of companies had an in-person office and then they just try to replicate that in-person office experience on Slack and it doesn't really work that well, right?
Doesn't
Like,
work.
but if you start from the beginning, I think it's a real superpower at this point from a hiring perspective. You'll be able to hire people you probably have no right being able to hire because you can offer them
Yeah.
something that the FANG companies won't.
Yeah. And I was going to say, from when you're hiring talent, also, you have so much more at your disposal in terms of types of skill sets, specializations. People work for so many different types of companies, even from different countries. And so you will get the access to talent for what you're looking for, which is amazing to see. And interesting to your point or kind of point, I think the challenge companies face is how do I manage people? How do I not only just grind for 6 hours and then maybe talk to somebody every 1 or 2 hours? That's not culture. That's not team building. So as a manager yourself, how do you maintain that culture? How do you not just grind out for 8 hours and then, oh, wait, I guess I got to talk to my team and maybe we'll set up some one-on-ones and do that haphazardly. How do you build that into your culture? And as a manager, change your daily habits and activities so that you can actually have your team kind of feel cohesive.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting as a company that builds meeting software, right? I don't really like meetings myself, especially internal ones, right? I think obviously external meetings are super valuable and important. It's the only way to meet these folks. I think about more about shared context, right? Like I think
Mm,
the challenging part for remote is making sure everyone has a full picture of what's happening because they won't get it. Historically, we have an office, there's like kind of this ambient awareness you get because you overhear conversations, you all eat lunch together, that sort of thing.
yep.
So I actually think the hardest thing to replicate is like that really good kind of ambient awareness of what's happening in the business outside of whatever you're working on.
Right.
And I think the way a lot of companies try to tackle that during COVID is they just have a lot more meetings. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Invite more people to these meetings so everyone knows what's going on. And I think that led to, okay, now I'm at home, but I'm on 8 hours of Zoom per day, and Zoom fatigue and
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. So I think a lot about like, how do we build and constantly rebuild all of our like asynchronous communication mechanisms, right? Like we only have one standing meeting a week across the entire team. And honestly, we reinvent that thing probably every 9 to 12 months, right? Do we still need this?
Yeah.
What do people need to hear about now? What are they not learning about, right? And try to create a lot of things where the numbers and stats and whatever the people need to know just kind of bubble up in different channels. And if you're interested in that stuff, you can subscribe to that channel sort of thing. So I think about
Right.
that much more. I think to try to replicate, it's almost impossible to replicate the human relationship piece, right? Where if you're going to the office to build friendships and whatnot, and again, this is why I think it tends to be a little more generational. Like folks younger in their career are going to be in office a little more because they want to build that network. They want to build those personal relationships. I tend to
Right.
think when you hire people remotely, they've already built a lot of those relationships. They're near their Dunbar number. And so they're just like, I just want to work. Like the relationships I want to build are with my family, like by,
Right.
being able to have lunch with them and stuff like that. So I just think it's a slightly different trade-off.
Yeah. When you think about your product in particular, have you had any signals on what industries you think it'll have the most impact long term? Obviously, we think, okay, if it's listening to meetings, sales, anything sales, maybe marketing related, anything more communication heavy, we think will have a huge impact, of course. But is there anything that you didn't assume or didn't hypothesize before where you're like, wow, this actually might impact this industry a lot more than I expected coming into it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we had a hypothesis that like the original types of products in the space, like recording your calls and transcribing them, summarizing them, were only built for sales. And we had kind of this theory like, okay, like we think this market's bigger than sales. Like certainly like founders can use it well, product people, customer success. But what I think I've been most surprised by is like, it's even bigger than we thought, right? Like I look at our top customer list all the time and I don't recognize 2/3 of the companies on it. I'm like, I don't know who these companies are, right? And I think it's a really good thing. I think you're also seeing this world now where historically companies were excited about showing you the logos of their Silicon Valley startups they sold to. And now everyone would much rather build businesses around normal companies, right?
Yeah.
Advertising
Yeah.
agencies and
Good
consultancies.
reviews.
And we're seeing therapists and nonprofits. And so what we've kind of seen is like Fathom, how much you're going to work with, how much you're going to enjoy using Fathom is directly correlated almost exactly to how many meetings do you have per week. More
Yeah.
meetings you have per week, the more you're going to like Fathom. And so like we actually, when you sign up, we look to see like how many meetings are on their calendar. Not that we do anything with that. That's kind of like our own bellwether of, okay, how good are our onboarding rates and all these sorts of things. And so you kind of find that like number of meetings per week isn't correlated with any industry. It's just more correlated with like roles and across all industries. Everyone's on a bunch of these video calls. So it's pretty
Yeah.
broad. So that's been kind of surprising.
The healthcare bit is pretty cool. And I totally could imagine how much more present it is as practitioners. Even maybe one thing comes to mind is, okay, I'll go to the therapist and they have this and everything's remote now. And how much more better they're going to be at serving their customers or their patients because of what they know or what they can recall from those. Because I mean, I'm sure you hear this all the time and I've heard you say it in interviews, but there's so much you miss from the moment you end the call to when you're trying to recall what happened. Like,
Yes.
there's so much information that's not verbal that you miss too. How was their feeling? Did they have a good time on the call? I can't remember that interaction. Was it positive? Was it negative? So
Right.
much more that goes involved. Yeah. Yeah.
There's also some fun use cases that I hadn't thought of, but were like, hey, we run X business and our customer said Y on a meeting. And then later on, they said they never said that. They didn't agree to that or not. And we grabbed the clip of, you understood the price was this and you agreed to it. And they're like, oh, we've had probably like once a week or like once a month, I hear about this. You saved us thousands of dollars because some customer said they never said a thing, which they absolutely said. So there's just some fun use case. Like human memory is like way worse than I realized, right? And it's kind of cool. Yeah. I mean, it's changed the way I work, right? Like it used, and I think that's going back to my thing about conviction. That's why I think it's kind of a super, like a hack to build a product that solves a problem you have, right? If you look at a lot of the best companies, I feel like the founders were building there are some really good founders that can go into a business they know nothing about and do the research and build out some good product. I just think that's way harder than you yourself have that pain, that problem, build a product that solves your pain point. Because you'll know when you've solved it, right? Oh, wow, this is really, again, with Fathom, I hate taking notes. Like I
Yeah.
kind of joke to my girlfriend, it's single threaded, right? It's, I can talk or I can write. I can't do both. And so I can rapidly switch, but I can't do both. And
Right.
now it's not only does this thing take notes for me, but more so it's just changed the way I use notes where if I meet with you and I meet with you 2 weeks later, I don't think about you anything in between. And then but when I have that meeting with you, the follow-up meeting with you 10 minutes before, I go look at the previous recording and read the summary and watch the last 3 minutes. And it's reactivates that part of my brain. And it's almost just
Right.
like we got off that call 10 minutes ago, even though it was 2 weeks or
Yeah.
2 months ago. Right. And that's a really powerful hack for building relationships when they feel like, oh, I talk to Rich once every 6 months, but it feels like he remembers everything I told him. I was like, I don't,
Yeah.
the system does. Right. So building something for yourself, I think is just such a, it's too easy to get seduced by, oh, I heard this market's really big, but unless you have a lot of domain expertise, you're probably not going to be the person that's going to figure out how to build the perfect solution to that.
Yeah. It's fascinating too, because the more we learn about memory, and I was listening to a Huberman Lab podcast, and he was talking about how we have spotlight focus, where we focus on what we're working on, but we also have another mechanism that's almost like a RAM in the sense that it's a more automated procedure. And then when we think about memory, it's really it does store very specific and unique information to where you can have the same part or similar memory storage for a particular celebrity. There was a test they did. Yeah, I don't know if you saw this one, but everyone has I don't know if it was Emily Blunt, but they use some celebrity, and it's like everybody has that who then encounters that person. And so that happens with any new knowledge. But it's almost like you're just strengthening the path to that recall. And
Yeah.
it's not gone, it's just finding it there, the breadcrumb to get it is more challenging than we expect a lot of times.
Yeah. Every time some Tupac song from the 90s comes on, and I remember every single word of it, but I can't remember what was on the grocery list from 2 hours ago. I'm just like, scumbag brain,
What is it
right?
for?
Like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
why, yeah, why, why can't I have more agency over how we're storing these things?
Yeah, yeah. 3 more questions for you, Richard. One is books, nonfiction books. No, sorry, not nonfiction books, non-business books. I always like to get recommendations on books, but I find myself now reading the same Lean Startup, 0 to 1. What's another one? Contagious is a really good one for those who wanna learn word of mouth marketing. But non-business books, what would you recommend to tap into? Something interesting, something that just takes us out of the startup building, monetizing, scaling, all this stuff.
Okay, I'll give you one that's on the line. One's definitely on the line. One of my favorite books. It might be a business book. It's probably a business book, but it's called "The Score Takes Care of Itself" by Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh was the
Okay.
49ers coach in the 80s
Love
that won
that.
all the,
Love that book. Yeah.
and it's really good. Just like a mindset of don't worry about the top numbers. Just like work on the little things. Everything will happen. I so I typically try to oscillate between a business book and a fiction book, and I exclusively read basically like sci-fi. I feel like sci-fi does for my brain what video games do a little bit too, where it's like just gets me to think outside my world and just gets me more creative.
Yeah.
Now I think everyone's caught on to this, but I still love the Three Body Problem series,
Oh,
especially the second book
never heard.
and the third. Honestly, I could do without the first one. The first one's fine. Just it's world building for the second and third one, and you could probably skip the first one, and if you wanted
Yeah.
to. It's also very unique. It was I forget, it was like the first Chinese literature to win this like prestigious sci-fi award that's escaping my brain right now. But it's a very different writing style than almost anything you'll have read because I think that also is interesting, right? Like the character development's actually really bad, but the world building is fantastic. And the story arc over the three books stretch from like modern day to like the heat death of the universe. Like it's just so big in scale.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
it's just like mind bending. So I think that's a really great read
Yeah.
overall.
I love that because recently I was like writing something. I realized, and I don't really do a lot of creative or everything's really pointed writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's nice to go into something that talks about a feeling, but using whether it's the external environment or something adjacent to it to communicate it. That's stuff that I think is getting me more interested and excited. And I think it helps with crafting stories and messages to customers and people you talk to
Mm-hmm.
in your life. Next question is, now that we're coming to the end of the episode, obviously there's a bunch of things we should have covered. Maybe we probably need so much more time, but is there any question I didn't ask you that I should have? Anything we didn't touch upon that we wanted to touch upon right now?
Gosh, no, I feel like this was pretty thorough. I can't
I'll
think
tell
of
you one
anything.
thing. Hypothesis building. I heard you say it in another podcast, and I was like, I was like, I hope we get to there. But the whole theory that you have around testing hypothesis versus a product, and
Mm-hmm.
I really loved how you captured that idea of good founders test a hypothesis, and the solutions and product that'll all unfold, but
Yep.
don't stray away from the hypothesis testing because that leads you in the right direction. I really liked your point on that. And
It really anchors you. You can tell when it's like, talk to some founders and they're like, for example, with Fathom, we had this hypothesis that like transcription was the primary like cost of this business 4 years ago. We think that's going to go to zero and therefore this will be possible. And then therefore this will be possible. But if you talk to, I think good founders sound like that. And there's a lot of folks that are just kind of like, I don't know, I'm kind of building a thing and hoping people like it. And so if you actually force yourself, what do I think is wrong with all the existing ones? Oh, I think that there's a much bigger market for this if you actually gave away for free and charge this amount afterwards, right?
yeah,
And then that keeps you honest with, oh, right, why am I building all this? What am I trying to learn? Going back to feedback
right,
too, right? Like if you just ask for random feedback on, you'll get a bunch of random stuff. But if you actually are trying to figure out like, oh, our first hypothesis, we think that if we make the happy paths really good, this is a product that people will use day in, day out. Great.
right,
Don't stop until you validate that or invalidate that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's
yeah.
something I think YC tries to teach folks a lot, but I think it's a pretty clear difference in the outcomes when you think about it that way.
Yeah. Well, Richard, like I said, I could ask you, I have a whole list of other questions that maybe we'll spend another podcast answering. But last little bit is for our audience, for those out there, where can we find you and be a supporter of not only what you're doing, what Fathom is doing, anything exciting, any news about the company? Last little bit, where can we find you support and what should we be excited about on the horizon?
Cool. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's like the only social media I know how to do anymore. Can connect with me there. Leave a message. I've honestly over like 1,000 invites with no message. If I don't see a message, I assume you're some like recruiter or spammer or something like that. So leave a message. Be happy to chat. If you sign for Fathom, it's fathom.video. Again, it's completely free to use forever, right? Love your feedback. If you have any thoughts on where it can improve, always love to get that. Where am I excited? I mean, we're in crazy times, man. This AI stuff is insane, right? Like another hypothesis we had in the business was like, we think AI is going to get good in the next couple of years. We don't think people want transcripts, but we think you'll need a transcript to do all the fun stuff with
Mm,
AI. And that's certainly come true in the last 6 to 9 months. It'll be really interesting to see if the pace of progress in AI continues or if it hits some plateau. Like I basically have like in my core friend group, like 50-50 split between, oh, we think we've hit the like plateau of what this approach to AI can do. And other people are like, it's going to blow, it's just going to keep on this like exponential curve. It's kind of crazy, right? Like I think may you live in interesting times thing has never been more apt.
right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Richard, it's been amazing hearing about your journey as a founder, how you build, how you think about building businesses and what you've learned in your experience and really what you're excited about on how this approach is not only going to reach a lot of users, but lead people into a happy place. It sounds like you're thinking about product and building it the right way. So hope a lot of people can extract gems out of this conversation and implement it in their business and offering better products and solutions and get them over the hump. So Richard, thank you so much for being on the show today and joining us on Behind Company Lines.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.